Hi, Fabi.
Hello.
Hi. Oh, dramas this morning. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. I just got to stop this. Stop. No, pause. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Kitchen Design Essentials in the Your Forever Home podcast. Today, I've got in the studio on our YouTube and on our Zoom studio, we've got Fabieli Fontana, who is part of the White Pebble Interiors team. And today we're going to talk about key design mistakes. And really, the reason this was actually not part of the original plan, the part of the original program for Kitchen Design Essentials. And Fabi and I had been in the car, we'd been at a client, and we just started talking about all the sorts of different things and mistakes that we'd mitigated with a lot of our clients. And because they had engaged us to do their drawings, or because they had engaged us early on, we were actually able to prevent a lot of what we see as design mistakes. So either from a functionality perspective, things could have been better, or from an aesthetic perspective, they could have also turned out much better. And so I said, hey, we should talk about this on the podcast and let our listeners also hear about some of the key design mistakes that can happen and things that are often overlooked when there's not an experienced eye looking at it, particularly early on, and how it can actually be resolved quite easily. So Fabi and I are basically going to have a chat today and just go through some of the things that we've experienced, working with clients, and some of the things that we see and how you can actually learn from these and make sure that they're not going to be part of, your kitchen design. So with no further ado, welcome Fabieli, I should say.
Hi, Francis. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here again.
Yeah, it's good because I think last time we were chatting about, well, obviously we're chatting about kitchens, but today we're going to be quite focused on
bit more specific about
details. So some of the mistakes we've seen in our time, projects we've worked on where we've been engaged too late, and sometimes we can't fix those things. But obviously when we're involved early, and particularly if we're doing the design itself, the joinery and the actual layout of the kitchen, we've able to prevent some of these things happening. So I think one of the first things, Fabi, that we've seen quite a bit, particularly recently, is around windows.
Yes, we have been very mindful about windows lately. Well, always, but we have been seeing so many things that could happen in a different way, could work better in the kitchens that we have been designed if the windows were planned in a different way. So I think it's a big topic to talk about.
It is. And so let's go through a couple of examples. The first one that springs to mind for me is we were doing a sanity check. I was doing a floor plan sanity check for a client, and obviously that involves looking at the windows as well as the layout, the space planning and everything. So that enabled us to look at the windows in the kitchen. And I know that we then changed the fact that there was no openable windows in the kitchen. And, I was concerned about the ventilation that was going to come in. There should always be some sort of ventilation in the kitchen, particularly when you're going to burn toast. And you need to get that smell out of the kitchen quickly. So we changed the actual way the windows were openable. So we made sure that the sink was centered on the window. We made sure then that there was ventilation with those windows. And it also meant that, there was then continuation of windows. We said, well, actually, we've got all these windows in this big kitchen space. We don't need these other windows because there's going to be a dining area. And so there was a bit of window overload. And so because we were able to show the clients the layout of that space, they realized as well that having that particular window over the dining right next to the kitchen was really not necessary. But I think the key there was getting the sink centered and then also ensuring that there was ventilation.
Yeah, the ventilation is super important, but also, as you just said, center the sink in there, because the sink was in the same position, the same wall as the window, but it wasn't centered. So I think sometimes people just don't realize how these small things, just moving a little bit things around, makes such a difference at the end, because it will just look odd
And
if
it'll drive you
all
nuts.
was
What about the
done
one we
without
were doing
centering.
in Yarraville where, you know, the tap wasn't centered, the sink, because they had a 1.5 and the sink looked okay, but then the tap wasn't centered on the window. And I know that, you know, we were talking about that with the architect.
Yes, for this same project, actually, we started at the beginning another mistake that is not related to windows actually, but the sink and the stove were really close. So we actually moved the sink, and one of the reasons why we moved the sink was actually thinking about the windows as well in center and make it all be functional, like thinking about where the fridge was located, where the stove were located, and how and where the window was located as well. So we just need to think about everything all together and not looking at one specific thing at a time.
In silos, yeah. I mean, the other thing that I think about with that particular project as well is the entire, you know, a big galley kitchen, very big lineal kitchen that then also flowed to the walk-in pantry, which also flowed to the laundry. And so one of the features that the architect obviously had put in was just this massive long window as a splashback, which was absolutely stunning. But then we came in and we actually changed exactly where the frame of that window was going to be so that it lined up with the cabinetry. And so it's those little details that all the lines are lining up. Can you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And, you know, and we said to the architect, and this is again where, you know, when you're talking with and have a relationship with the architect, you're working together on the job as a whole. So I know that we asked the architect, you know, can we move that window frame? It was only, I think it was only 120 mil. And that meant that all the cabinetry lined up. It meant the sink was centered in the cabinetry on the window, and they had to check the lintel. They had to check that there was enough support, and then it was all okay and we were all happy.
Exactly.
So
and then,
that was,
and then in the same project, actually, it started with this long window, and the window was going in the back of the stove as well.
yeah.
Client actually changed her mind in the middle of the process.
She didn't want maintenance. She didn't want to be cleaning glass.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be either. She said, I'm not getting my Windex out after I cook every day. So she,
Exactly.
in advance, she didn't want that maintenance, which was awesome. Sorry, go on, Fabi.
Yeah, because it does look beautiful with this long window working as a splashback, and then you can see your garden, and it just looks beautiful. But what's beautiful doesn't work for everyone, and maybe some people would be more than happy cleaning that window all the time just because they really like the looking. But in her case, she didn't want to. She wanted functionality first, so this is why we ended up having a splashback just on the back of the stove.
And I mean, she was also really happy with that because she had the intention was to have a splashback in her mind because she knew she didn't want the maintenance, which was great. But we also needed to make sure that that was balanced. Remember how we were actually talking about, oh, we're going to have a dicky little splashback and that's going to look really silly and it's not going to be balanced. So we had to make sure that the proportion of that tiled splashback was actually then relative to everything else. So we spent quite a bit of time getting that proportion correct so that it did look balanced, even though it was right up one end of the other end of that kitchen. But she was so happy having tiles back in and having those stunning tiles.
And they are beautiful, her splashback.
Yeah. So, but I suppose you know, for you listening, it's really looking at how all the lines, some people don't focus on the lines and they've got, you know, lines that are not matching up and you think, oh, it doesn't really matter, I've got the function. But actually, all of that really affects the overall aesthetic, and it's these tiny little details can make such a big difference. So I suppose that project is a really good example of working with the architect, moving frames of windows and other bits and pieces. We altered our cabinetry to make sure then that the sink was centered and the tap. It was only 100 mil, but gee, that would drive you crazy on a daily basis, particularly if you're a symmetrical person.
Exactly. And one more important thing to say is that we only are able to actually see and plan these kind of details once we are working elevations and we know the exactly size of all appliances, which kind of appliances each client is gonna have in their kitchens, because in this specific case, we could balance the exactly dimension of the splashback, but we had to take in consideration the ratio they were using, because this was actually defining the size of the overhead cabinets. So to actually have this splashback aligned with the cabinets and everything else, all this needed to be defined first. So we had to know, and they had to know which appliances were going in. And all these specific details that many times you can't really see or define while you are working only in the floor plans. And this is why it's so important to work with elevation since the beginning.
I think that's a really good point, Fabi. I'm glad you raised it, actually, because I probably would have forgotten. But also Jeremy raised that last week on the podcast on the Builder's Insight. And he was actually saying, work with elevations. I have a lot of clients, we have a lot of people come to us and they've just got the floor plan and they're just going to go to the cabinet maker, but they are a cabinet maker, as Jeremy highlighted last week as well. And I think all these details are just impossible to plan when you're just looking at a floor plan. And the elevations are so important to get these sort of details right. And I think sometimes people feel they're going to save a bit of money by not getting proper joinery design done, but the mistakes and the regret you'll have with it not being how you want and the precise details, I think is just a waste of money. And I think Jeremy mentioned that too. It was about undercapitalizing by not getting the design right. So it is really important. It's one of the key reasons why you do elevations, because then the cabinet maker knows exactly what they're going to be building.
Yes.
And thinking's already been done. We do the thinking.
Yes, and sometimes people look only at the 3D or with simple elevations that don't have dimensions and make decisions based on that. And then I just remember another client that we just checked their plans and the elevations they had it done before. And I remember we didn't have dimensions in these plans, but only looking at it, it just looked too wide. All the doors were looking too wide. And they didn't define the appliances before have these elevations done. So it doesn't really make much sense if you don't have everything defined, because then you can't have this right.
No. I mean, even things like, the materials that you're selecting, certain manufacturers only produce board in a certain height. And if you've got really high pantry doors, you may have specified or chosen a material and they only do a 24-40 board, but your pantry height is going to have a door that's 27, which means you'll need to change the manufacturer of that particular product. Or sometimes if you're choosing a particular type of material like thermo doors, they're not actually very durable so high. So all these sorts of details come out as well. And, you can have that produced, but then your door's going to start warping. So these are all the things that we're sharing with our clients. I wanted to go back to the window, Fabi, because I'm thinking about another client now where the window, we were doing all the, elevations as we do and the design of the kitchen. And remember, the window was off center with the cabinetry. So there was a highlight window, and then we did the cabinetry, and it affected two things. One, all the cabinetry was on the wall and the window wasn't centered, which drove us crazy. And then the other one was the window was so low, even though it was a highlight window, that it meant all the cabinetry was really stubby and short. And so we had a great relationship with the architect too, didn't we?
Yes, and this is important when architects and designers are flexible, because you can work together and make the best of it. But it really depends on have a good relationship and be respectful and just really try to find the best solution.
But I mean, that's when we went back to the architect and said, look, do you mind raising the window up, because we don't want short, stubby cupboards. They look terrible. Yes. And she said, yep, no problem. She had to check some of the engineering again because there were support areas. And then we asked her to center it. We found the best location for it, so it was centered.
Ideally, in this case, we would like to make a longer window, getting the whole wall to be better lined with the cabinets, but there was structural
constraints
that we couldn't do it. And then this is where it goes and comes back. So we couldn't do that. Of course, we need to respect that. And then we found another solution that was lined with some of the cabinets, and it still looks good.
But again, we still got our ideal solution wasn't available from a structural perspective. However, we were still able to center the window, which was far better than it not being centered. And because we were telling her what we were trying to achieve, we were then able to get higher cupboards for the client as well, and it made it look better, and also they're getting more cabinet space. So I think that was a really good outcome with that too. But also on the same job, we were talking with the architect too about the fact that we couldn't have cavity sliding doors because it was a solid brick wall. But then we were looking at, okay, so how can we have doors, external doors, barn style doors? And then again, we were talking with the architect about structurally how we could do that. But we were also thinking about what was the best side to have that door in terms of how it was going to affect the cabinetry and the laundry, but also the walk-in pantry. And where were we going to be able to achieve a door with minimal impact on the cabinetry and the bench space that we had in those subsequent rooms.
Yes, and this same client, before this issue with the sliding doors, this actually size of the wall before the door starts was on the side of the fridge, and the fridge, once they have done the floor plans, the fridge was smaller than it actually will be. So once we realized the size of the fridge and where the door was positioned, we found out that actually it wasn't wrong enough to open the fridge.
The wall was too small.
The wall was too small. The fridge was going to open its door just in front of it still will open in front of the door, but we just needed more wall and more room to not be so in front of this.
So again, we went back to the architect and said we need to extend this nib wall so that we can have the fridge there, not protruding into the door space. So again, it's just all this. We're not going to harp on about it because you'll get bored of us saying it, listeners. But it is just all these things got picked up at really early on in the piece, and it meant that we were able to change things again because we're liaising with the architect to do that. The other one I was thinking of was, again, when we're talking about doors, was when we had a client that ended up getting a much deeper fridge, and that was actually going to mean that she couldn't even get in because it protruded into the door space. So again, we just asked we were actually working with the builder, and we asked him whether we could move the door, and he could move the door. So then we changed the plans accordingly. And I think that's something that I see a lot on Facebook groups for building and renovating is clients get in and they go, oh, my fridge sticks so far out. It sticks out much further than the cabinetry. And yes, fridges are deep and they also need space at the back to have air rotating around them, which is why you have a little bit of space on either side as well. This is, of course, unless you've got a built-in fridge. And so you can actually pack out the back. Most bench spaces are 600 deep, and for a fridge, you're going to need at least 700. But you can pack out the back if you're planning it correctly so that your fridge is flush. But, you need to know that in advance. Some people are not worried that it is going to stick out a little bit because you obviously need space to open the doors. But I know with that client, because she knew her appliance, it goes back to what you were saying before, Fabi, if you know your appliances, we design around it. And she actually changed her fridge partway through the process, but it meant then we caught it in time so that the door could be moved and she could have the fridge that she wanted.
Yes, and just talking about the fridge, I just remember one other client that we actually have talked before about their windows, but they also had the island bench that's actually kind of in front of the fridge. So there is the fridge on the side, and then there is this walkway, and the island bench is in front. And the walkway was, I think, 1 meter, and then we made it wide because this is a walkway and it is where the fridge is open. So it wasn't room enough for actually
Well, getting around it. Yeah, no, I remember. And that's actually quite common. It's always one of the design principles really with the kitchen is that you've got the fridge somewhere on an outer part of the kitchen design rather than it being internal. So that means that you can access it really easily. But yes, you need that walkway that between the island bench and the rear bench, often where the fridge is, to be at least 1.1. I mean, I've seen it on plans at 800 and it's just far too narrow, particularly for a family kitchen where, you know, you're going to have kids coming in and out and all that sort of stuff, but you need to be able to open the doors. Same for dishwashers. You need to have that space. So really, a metre would be the absolute minimum, but we always work with 1.1 or 1.2. And there is going to be a whole episode for you out there for key measurements so that you know what are some of the key you know, foundations for measurements and what you really need to have, because that's something that we look at a lot and just notice on the plans. There's not enough consideration for flow and spatial planning with regards to other furniture and what's going on in that space. One thing I just wanted to get back to, and this is actually around material selection, with one of our clients who was having a really long galley kitchen, which then flowed into the walk-in pantry, which then flowed into the laundry. So one big lineal piece basically, which is great. But it really affected, we had to really consider what that material was going to be. So not only we had to think about it aesthetically in terms of going from the kitchen to the walk-in pantry, which then flowed, you know, with a cavity sliding door into the laundry, that all needed to be aesthetically the same. We talked about, you know, if we change our flooring in the laundry, it's just not going to look quite right because that's all on one big long wall. So we needed to really consider what was going to be the flooring type that was going to work in the kitchen and the pantry, but also be suitable for a wet area in the laundry. So not only did we have one flooring type that you're going to get that flow aesthetically, but it also had to be durable enough to be in a wet area. So that was also something that we needed to think about. And in the same house, that mudroom area, that was all open and linked to the open plan living. So you couldn't really have a break in that floor. It was just not going to look great. So think about the flooring type and the flow. Less floor types in a home are going to be much better than mixing up and having lots of different floor types. It looks aesthetically better. It gives a much more illusion of space. So minimizing your flooring types and thinking about that flow is really important. But the functionality and the durability needs to work as well. So I'm going to just chat about another job where it was a really big kitchen and it was quite a big square and we were completely redesigning it, and they really wanted a walk-in pantry, but it wasn't possible, as in we were not going to take space from somewhere else because that impact was too great. So as you know, we're not big fans of all these corners in kitchens, and we've spoken about that in previous episodes. But what we decided to do was create a step-in pantry, I like to call it. I don't like to, you know, oversell and under-deliver. So it could be marketed as a walk-in pantry if they were ever going to sell their home, but it's a forever home, so it's unlikely. But we used the corner, one of the corners in their kitchen, and created a pantry with a sliding door and retractable doors. And so not only was that a place that they could have a bench in there, they put all their appliances in there, but it still acted like a pantry as well, with overhead cupboards and below bench cupboards as well. So that was such a great, you know, if I say so myself, such a great solution. The client was so happy. And this is actually one of the solutions we provide a lot when there is a U-shaped pantry. You've got two lots of corners. We eliminate one of those corners by making it a step-in pantry. And we've done it in so many projects. And I know working with Jeremy quite a bit, he's been really happy with that. We have to adjust the bench types for that too, to make sure that they're deep enough to take the cavity sliding and the retractable doors. But that is such a win for clients when they say, wow, never thought I could have that, but what a fantastic use of dead space. And you've also got the height in a corner rather than it being in the middle of a space, which I think is going to lead to another one.
Yeah,
because I can see you and I know you can
we
talk.
were just discussing before because I was talking about another client where the pantry in the corner was actually an issue. So it's not like a pantry in a corner or anything in a corner is an issue or it is a mistake. It really depends on what is the situation, what else is around.
Yeah.
For this specific client, when we first got their floor plan, they had a pantry in the corner, but actually it didn't work well for their project, the way that the other things were settled around. So we ended up moving this, and it looks and it works so much better. So yeah, back to our point that you just need to plan and look to everything together. You need to look at the windows, to the appliances, to the layouts, to, of course, how the family uses their spaces, and it's all part of.
Well, that particular job, it was quite interesting because you and I debated a lot about that corner cabinet, that corner pantry, because yes, it was a U shape and it was like, yeah, we'll put in a corner pantry. But when you and I really talked about it, we realized that because they had a beautiful picture window and it's a country estate, they had a picture window there, and it was like, we're going to block all of that aesthetic with this big picture window that looked out to the view, and the island bench faced the window, that it meant that having that corner pantry was going to be so clunky and visual bulk around the window that it was actually going to ruin that picture window aesthetic. So that's why we decided not to do it. We had small shelves around there, so it was less blocky and the visual bulk inside was minimized. But we also had a conversation with that client around the necessity for a traditional pantry. And because it is a country home, we discussed with them how they were storing things, and we realized that actually they didn't need a traditional pantry. They were going to use some of the overhead and below cupboards for their food storage. And then all their crockery is going to go in a beautiful antique buffet. And so again, it comes back to talking about in advance, how is everything going to work? Where are we going to store things? And then we not only came up with something that was going to work for them on a daily basis from a functionality perspective, but aesthetically we solved it as well. And that picture window was still the highlight of that entire kitchen.
Yes,
rather
and
than
we also, for the same client, we found a different solution for storage, because at the first they had in their layout island bench that actually was open both sides for stools. And they actually have this beautiful dining table so close to the kitchen. They didn't really need so much space for stools in their kitchen, while they can use the table once more. They still can have stools in one of the sides, but then we planned with drawers in the other side, and they just have so much more space for storage with this.
Which they needed. But again, by consulting with them and chatting them through their options, some clients get so fixated on a look or something that they think they're going to use. But when we start talking to them about it and really exploring with them how that's actually going to work, like we did with them about your dining table so close, are you really going to sit here as a family when the dining table is one step away effectively? But I know a lot of clients come to us with, we really want one end of the island bench open. And yeah, it makes sense because it means you can sit around there rather than in a big long line and you're sitting in a conversation space. But some kitchens just are not set up to work like that, or you're going to sacrifice so much storage that actually the overall goal of what you're trying to achieve is compromised. So in consultation, they realised that they didn't need that open bench space that you're talking about, Fabi. And yeah, the dining table is where we sit anyway. And now they've got room for enough stools that the kids can sit there while they're preparing or people having a wine, and it worked really well. Again, it's just talking through things. So I suppose the message here is so much planning and discussion needs to be had with your designer to make sure that everything's been considered and that you are really aware of why you're going down a particular route, and that your designer is going to pick up things that you hadn't even thought about. I mean, that's what we're here for. We're experts in looking at details that you not even would be used to looking at. The window centered, our client hadn't even seen it. They didn't even realize, and they're like, oh yeah, oh thank God you picked that up, because we wouldn't have even known until we moved in and went, it's going to drive us crazy. So
and this is why so many stressful things happen during the building time, because if you don't pick up these things before, once you are actually building it, making the cabinets and everything, then you realize it, and then if you decide to redo things, so much cost is involved and delays, and no one is happy picking up mistakes in the way once you are building. So
and I think what
always,
you said
always better to spend more time and invest more in design and just define everything before it starts.
Which is probably why we are, or not always, but sometimes it's like, slow down, client. We need to slow down so that we can get the details right, because on site it's just going to be expensive. But I think it goes back, Fabi, to what you were saying before, and that is so much value is in the elevations, and I don't think people realize just how much value is in the elevations until they see the detail that goes in them. And they go, wow, yeah, how could you do that off a floor plan? You just can't. And the builder will love you for it. You need to have a good relationship with your builder, and the cabinet maker will love you for it, because there's no guesswork. It's just there.
Oh, just remember something else about the electrical position of the GPOs. And we were talking on the other day with a client about have it in the same colors as the splashback, or have the pop-ups, because so many times you choose this beautiful splashback tile and then you just don't think about how the GPOs are going to be positioned in there, and then people just leave for the electrician to do it, and it's not his job to thinking about aesthetics. So here it comes a beautiful, colorful tile with a white GPO in the PowerPoint in there. So this is something else that you always can plan before, where you were going to locate these points to don't have this bolding.
Such gold, Fabi. It's such, green being my favorite color, and there's a particular splashback that I'm, nuts for, and it's a dark bottle green. And if you can just imagine, you've got this stunning dark green splashback, and then pop is a white PowerPoint. So yeah, the pop-up in the bench, and I mean, you and I have talked about that as well. I'm not a massive fan of the pop-up. Just for me, from a functionality perspective, the pop-up PowerPoints. However, if I had to choose between a pop-up and having this beautiful green splashback unspoilt with PowerPoints, I'd go for it. So and they're really big in Europe, those pop-up bench PowerPoints.
And actually, the pop-up is not the only solution, because there are some kitchens that we have designed that, remember, there was this wall on the side, but then when we look at the electrical plan, the PowerPoint was just in front where the splashback was. And if it is on the wall on the side, you don't look directly to it, so it doesn't pop up as if it is on the side, as it is in front. So there are just different solutions, and I think my point is just we have to think about all these details.
Absolutely, it's all in the detail.
Once you are inside, and then there is a curtain and everything is ready to redo it, it's just
absolutely
painful.
So that's it is a really good one. And there are definitely ways to not even have a PowerPoint in the splashback at all, even if it isn't a dark one. So and these things are always popping up on these groups. Oh, I've done this and I've done that, and how can I fix it? So I think there's lots of awesome tips in there, and thanks for joining me, Fabi. Are there any other things we've missed?
We probably did, but not that I can remember now.
I think what
we
we wanted
can make
to cover
a
off
new
here.
list for a new podcast.
Yeah, I think we just wanted to cover off the big ones that we see frequently.
Yes.
And some of the big, and as we're saying, or as you said earlier, they're not necessarily, well, I suppose it depends what you view a mistake as, but they're things that could be improved or things that, could have been better. There could have been a much better outcome. Yeah, having the window not centered on the top of your cabinets, is that a mistake? Some people wouldn't notice it. Other people would. Is it a mistake? It's not ideal. It's not good design. It's not like it's not going to be able to work, but it's really not ideal. So I suppose some of these things you could think are not necessarily mistakes, but from a design perspective, we would regard them as far less than optimal, I think is probably the way of saying it. I think there was one other thing that I did want to cover off, and that is that often you'll get a design back, it might be from the architect or whatever, and the kitchen island is basically just facing one way, and that's the way it's going to be. And I think that not all the time, but it can be challenged in a lot of instances where if you've got another eye going over it, the island bench or the whole kitchen could actually be orientated and facing in a different direction. So really ask your designer, what is the rationale around the kitchen design being this way and that the island is facing in this direction. Maybe it's facing into the living, or maybe you want your island facing to the outside. So there are different ways you can skin a cat. So don't think that the way it's been done is gospel. Ask your designer for the rationale. There really should be a rationale as to why something has been designed the way it's been designed. And once you understand that, and there's reasoning and thinking behind it's being designed rather than just plugging things into a space, that is very different to designing. And I think that that's what we do on a daily basis, is we're designing things, thinking about the rationale as to why things are the way they are. So I think you should feel comfortable in asking your designer that. Don't you think, Fabi?
Yes, totally agree.
Yeah. So, because that's what we are constantly, doing that together. It's like if we did it like this or we do it like that. So we're bouncing things off each other.
And these are some things that we are really open to talk to our clients as well, because sometimes once we present back the drawings, they look at it and they ask some things, why this is not in a different way, or I would like to change it. And once we explain the
rationale.
I'm terrible saying some words, sorry. Once we explain it, they go, oh wow, so they didn't think in that way before, and for some reason sometimes they still can change because this is going to work in a different way better for them, but many times they just understand the rationality and then they go for it because they start to think in this way as well, and they see value on it. So it really is good to discuss and to talk and understand all the points and why things are done the way that they are done. So once you cover and you understand everything, you're going to be really sure that it will work well for you.
And I think that is critical. It's the rationale behind the design that makes the design what it is. And I think that's such an important point. I mean, even talking to clients about space planning, why would you have the sofa like that? Why can't we have it the other way? And once we talk through it, they totally get it. So, don't feel shy about asking your designer for the rationale behind the design, because design is thinking, and they've done so much thinking. And I know, Fabi, you and I are constantly, sparring with each other and going, what about this or what about that? It's almost, two minds together coming up with the design to make sure that it's going to be working. So it's the thinking that makes the design right.
Yes, lovely to be here to talk about it, Francis.
Lovely to have you back on, Fabi. I'm glad we work with each other on a daily basis, sparring and, putting all our rationales together.
Yeah.
So don't forget, everyone. There's lots of resources. We'll put them in the show notes as well, around other blogs that we've written around kitchen design. There's going to be some awesome episodes coming up. Next episode is going to be about bench tops, where I've got the architectural representative from Cosentino talking about different types of bench tops. There's actually going to be 2 episodes on bench tops because there's so much to chat about bench tops and so many new products coming out. So I'm really excited to bring that to you over the coming weeks. And we've had some awesome feedback around last week's episode on the Builder's Insight. So that's a good one to catch as well, where Jeremy and I talk about some of the key mistakes that are made simply from a builder's perspective and how that can be avoided. I think the key message here is going to be every episode we're going to talk about, getting in early so that you can avoid issues like Fabi said earlier on site, when it's going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of heartache. Don't forget, we also offer lots of different kitchen design packages and services, whether it's a new build or a renovation, really small packages right up to, basically all inclusive. So there's always something for everyone if you're thinking about getting some assistance in that area as well. So have a great week. Look forward to having you on the show next week. And don't forget to leave a review so that other people can find us. I've had lots of beautiful emails come in around how people are really enjoying the podcast. If you can leave a review, that would be so awesome, because it means that other people can find us as well. Have a great week, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.